All right, so here we are. This is the PMIRL podcast, where we interview project managers, program managers, people who run the projects for a living, to tell about their journey, tell about how they apply project management principles to everyday living, and more importantly, get into the art of what we call project management, and dispel some of the myths that exist out there as far as what the profession is and what it should not be. So I'm your host, Chuck Scott. Today, my guest is Dustin Biddle. Dustin, introduce yourself. What do you want to tell the people as far as name, title, all that fun stuff?
Hi, everybody. My name is Dustin Biddle. Just to call that out. I am currently working with a startup here in Columbus, Ohio, called Aries Solutions. I am the head of delivery and focused really on kind of the project management organization structure of how we do what we do.
Appreciate you giving a little insight into what does head of delivery mean. A lot of our audience members are outside the world of IT, outside the world of project management, and so it's good to give a little context to that. Fun story. A lot of people. So I started my career in the business side of the house, and then flipped over to the IT side of the house. Most of the people in my personal life, ever since I got out of the business side, they're like, I have no idea what you do.
What did you do in business?
So great question. So I kind of cut my teeth at L Brands, which is parent company to Bath and Body Works, Victoria's Secret, C.O. Bigelow, Pink Brand, and a host of other fashion retailers that have since been sold off. And I spent about 6.5 years there early in my career, and I had 4 different roles in that span, ranging from finance, then jumping over to merchandise planning and allocations, then jumping over to 2 operational roles. And also this is during the time that omnichannel is becoming a thing. So everything's got a technology element to it, right? Like so going back to my finance days, there was point of sale involved. There was the ERP, which was SAP. There was payments from a banking standpoint and making sure the reconciliation happened with credit card providers. There was encryption of files and being able to recover lost data. So even though I was a business function, everything I touched was systemic, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing with merchandise planning and allocations. I go over there, it's all systemic driven on how we get allocations to stores, right? Same thing with operations. Like again, omnichannel is becoming a thing. So, we're systemically figuring out how to link catalog to mobile to stores and, make that one-stop, synergistic is the word, a synergy for the customer, right?
Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. So that was my business side experience. And then around that time is where I started doing IT consulting work.
Okay. So you got that operational side that I think is so key to, so I think some of the trajectory, and I know we'll kind of talk about this a little bit later, but that operational folks make for fantastic, I feel like, delivery managers, because the pace, the demand is always there, right? And so you've got a taste of those different work streams of demand and everything. So that totally makes sense. It makes sense why we're here.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes sense why we're here. You've seen that in work, like when we're working. The other thing that I think is interesting to point out for our viewers is great project managers or program managers are very intrigued, insightful, ask questions about everything, right? Like, so I'm interviewing Dustin. Yeah, he just interviewed me a little bit. Seems to be a trait of great PMs, right? Like, it's one of those things where you're not just asking surface level questions. You really want to know everything so that you can plan appropriately for everything.
Oh, absolutely. There's always hidden nuggets, right? In any kind of conversation, I think it gets genericized to bonding rapport. A lot of times, like you say, key to consulting is bonding rapport, but I think it goes farther, right? Like, if you know someone's background, you know some of the language they might be invested in, where they might have driven some of their context that they're driving their decisions stuff too. So I think all that stuff is such good. Yeah, I get to man. It's such good.
So we're naturally kind of getting into the art of it, right? So let's just stay here for a second.
Yeah.
And I love this because you and I work with each other, but we also have connected on a personal level.
Yeah.
We see things kind of the same way. Even without having to have this conversation, I already know where you're going with this. Good project managers, program managers, you want to know all the agendas at the table.
Yes.
You want to understand, to your point, motivations. Why are they asking the questions they're asking? in real time, you're processing all this stuff and then applying and moving and facilitating conversations so that we get to this like common good, right?
Absolutely.
I love that. Like, it's like a little display right here.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to you. So, one of the things that's unique about you, you mentioned like consultants, right? So you've done, you've been in delivery roles for large corporations. You've been, you work for a startup currently. You've been what I like to call it mercenary, meaning like you're just an independent consultant on your own. Like, you kind of wear all the different hats.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about those experiences, what each one gave you as far as like how you built upon each one to go to the next thing.
Yeah.
And again, like how it applies to everyday living, etc.
Yeah, of course. It's funny. You mentioned some roles I've also done in technical account management. So like a sales role, I've played with that. But so my journey is, I went to school to be a programmer. Like, I lived in a very small town, and there's only so many disciplines, right? There was technology track was, hey, you're gonna be a coder or you're gonna drive networking, right? That was the track. So went into kind of programming, learning to see old stuff. I'm not gonna age myself here, but came out of college essentially wanting to. So I wanted very specific. Well, I want to be a programmer. I want to invent code, make applications, and I came out of that wanting to broaden that. There's so much involved with technology that's not just how it's built, but why was it built? Where does it go, right? And all these questions, how do you build into it, right? So we talk about delivery is you kind of have to, have a sense of everyone's kind of motives and agendas. And so, it was a track to build towards. So, I came out of school, went into quality assurance, so testing, and started to kind of learn, like, okay, what's the intent and like where this went. Kind of fast forward a little bit, ended up in a role here in Columbus where I had to wear multiple hats. And so we would implement a piece of software into a client, and it's kind of an open-ended software. Okay. You could do all kinds of stuff, but this is for managing case management for a call center. So we had this big platform we bring in, and the contract was, hey, make this operationalized for this team, right? So at the time, we didn't have BAs, we didn't have PMs. What we had was this title called consultant.
Okay.
Right? So, this consultant role configured, built the requirements, also managed the project, right? So I think I really kind of got my roots, Chuck, in this kind of consulting role. So, we'd go to a client, right? And we'd bring this thing in and we say, are you excited? Why are you excited, right? And they would pull out their Excel spreadsheet, right? And they were like, please take me away from this Excel spreadsheet, right? So, then you kind of went to this path. Okay, their motives are what, right? Why do they care about me? This is time saving, and like all these kind of pieces, right? You start to like just dive deep in all this kind of, what are they doing? Where are they going? Kind of a thing, and how do they get there, right? Yeah. And so you start. For me, it was the first path of not just see this as lines and numbers, but also the people that use it, right? Like everybody involved in making that decision, and having compassion for what happens as a good life. Right. Yeah. So kind of digging deep here, but I really think it's where I kind of got this sense of wear hats. You're a team player. You remove obstacles. Give yourself whatever titles. Right now, it's kind of the core for me of getting behind delivery. I think what came after that, you can put into a little bit more of a box form called project management. So what do we mean by project, Chuck? Right? We're saying, hey, I've got a fixed budget or a fixed schedule, right?
Or both.
Right. Or both often. Yeah, absolutely. And maybe a couple work streams, right? And so I've done that for a while. Kind of exploring what it meant to kind of structure out of that, right? And kind of put common practices. You start to kind of build that core of like, am I in that phase? Do I need this big defined PMP structured approach for this scenario, right? It started kind of there. And then in parallel to that, I started, again, I didn't want to lose empathy, right? So, depending upon the situation that you're in, it's, we don't want to say you don't want to have compassion. You need to have compassion, but you also need to be a driver, right?
That's a good point.
So, learned to start to play with those balances and scales, right? Empathy, gosh, this stinks, right? We're in this together, right? But hey, I need this done.
Right. So you're getting on something great here, right? Like this concept of this duality of what a good project manager does of empathy, yet driving, right? That's a hard balance to maintain. I love so a couple of things I want to touch on, right?
Yeah.
It is a couple of things. You said one, like this idea of consultancy. And I know when I first switched over from, being a traditional, business me, and play different roles in the business side of that house. When I moved over to the IT side in the consultant role, because I never was a full-time employee as a IT person. Now that I think about it, I've only done that for 9 months of my entire career. So when I switched over, most people in my either professional network or personal network were like, I don't understand how you're a consultant in the IT space when you didn't come from the IT background, right?
Right.
And you kind of touched on it. You said team player, multiple hats, right? I don't know the answer to this question, but do you come from a sports background?
Do you come? Yes.
Okay.
Why not?
So same here, right? Like flash all over my LinkedIn profile, a hockey enthusiast. But that whole concept of like team sports and being able to wear multiple hats or like whatever the team needs you to do to get us over the goal line per se, right? Like that's really what the role of a consultant is. And so to your point, it gets freed up into different roles within a project team. Because really there is the deliverable associated with this. You and I, because of some of our attributes, like I would say, to your point, that capability of understanding empathy. Where's the team out on the emotional scale every day, every week, every month, etc. Be able to drive towards the deliverable, but also want the brainstorm that makes sense. All these things are basically like almost like a coach or a team leader or some sort.
Yeah.
And to your point, like sometimes we get way down in the weeds with the team. Sometimes we're operating at a higher level, but we're very mobile in that way, right?
Yeah.
So I like how you touched upon again the role of a consultant, because I think people always think like technical SME coding, and there are consultants that do that, but like in the delivery roles, that's not what we do, right? It's a lot of people management. It's a lot of being in tune with the team. To use a present day example, I think what Deion Sanders is doing right now on this, global college, or not global, but national college stage is an exact impression of that. Like good project managers, program managers instill a sense of confidence in the people that execute, and instill a sense of like, okay, this is our direction, and buy-in to a common goal, right? And we're just seeing this on great display right now. He's turning a program around overnight just by his presence, right? And then when you think about being a contractor or consultant, that's essentially what you do is you come into a new environment and you are able to instantly impact it, right? I think that's the big difference between a full-time associate who already has built equity in that environment versus like you or I land there, and I was put a timeline of 2 weeks of myself. By 2 weeks, I should be adding value. Like that's kind of the way I look at it. Those first 2 weeks are just understanding the culture, the players, the environment, what nuances exist already before I got there, what things do I have to attack first. But like my thought process is 2 weeks in, I should be driving this bus and adding value from a caller standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, right? It starts with listening. Starts with listening, right? And then I did not know this because you're seasoned like I are. We built tools. We can serve with very primitive tools. Give us a spreadsheet, right? And then we can go a long way because we never know the scenario that we're into. So, okay, so if you don't have tools that facilitate everything, you don't have a process, maybe that is an organization that's going to put people on conveyor belts and move into what do you do? Starts with listening, right? This is why are we here, right? And where do we need to go? And who can tell us that, right? Who can give us the feedback? That's
a big piece of the puzzle. Who here can help me figure out which way is up at the beginning, right? So sorry, I took us back to a couple of points that I love that you make. I didn't want to derail you from.
Oh, you're good.
The trajectory you're on as far as storytelling.
Yeah. So let's hop back on, right? Yes. So we're talking about so we've built into concepts of delivery, and we've then gone down a path of a project, defining the box. What makes that project successful, right? So we learn technology, we learn terminology, right? We're learning that. Okay, I need a budget. Well, what does that mean, right? That the forecasting in us. We see build up this kind of context and just basic rudimentary kind of function within to manage all these expectations, right? I think kind of starts there. You kind of need to say, whoa, okay, where am I and where do we need to go? And like everybody else, that's kind of where I started, right? So I came out of this delivery, which is this consultant and learning empathy and kind of being, a dynamic team leader. And what was really interesting too is that we had a product that we implemented to clients. And so with that's interesting is that you have two teams, right? You have our team, our internal team, and you have the client's team. And you really got to break down to say we are a team, right? Right. And that so all of this really good chemistry at science and art, right, started to kind of formulate. So get into projects, keep us moving. Where do I go, right? Everybody's career is what's next, right? Like, so, there's one, I think, mindset shock that is like, okay, I'm going to grow through the complexities that I can, right? So, my project budget's $500,000 and I want to take $1 million project and I want to do $2 million, $4 million, right? So what's happening behind that together, right? So our teams are getting bigger, our work streams are getting longer, there's a lot more stakeholders involved and stuff like that. So it's a very kind of simplistic way to say, what can I tackle to grow? And so that's one aspect that I, was kind of learning. But also for me, what drove me and motivated me was why? It kept just digging at me, right? Like, where's this backlog of things to be done, right? I don't know how many, probably your fair share of these, we get a project like one page paper. Yep. Like, this is supposed to define 2 years of development objectives and goals. And it's like, whoa, where's the why live? Sure. And that used to just eat at me. Like, how do I get to why? So I started doing some pre-sales engagement opportunities because I can define what the project was, right? And so I could hear people express their opinions towards a product and get a sense of what a project would be to make that project come reality, right? So I started to play with this, and I took on a technical account management role. And also that role came with, it's live. So now that feedback, that wonderful feedback, either you hit the mark or you didn't, and what are you gonna do to fix it, right? So, I experimented there for a while, but my passions were found in just the execution of ideas.
Gotcha.
So I came back, right? And then, all right, some back-end project management. So where do you scale from there? And that became program, right? So program, multiple work streams. And I think the biggest distinction.
Sorry, let me pause you for a second. So again, if you're tuning in for the first time here, program management is the next level of project management. Think of directors of project work streams that all come up to the whole. So program managers typically considered directors in their respective worlds. And the true definition is a program manager manages multiple project managers all under one program that's, again, these work streams all roll up to the common goal. Typically, they're big enough work streams in an organization where the program manager's primary function is managing the budgets to their so massive, managing the resources and just moving those chess pieces around, whether it be supporting things within the organization or just within the program itself, or both, as well as stakeholder engagement is a huge piece of that, right? And when we talk about stakeholders, we're talking about, chief marketing executives, chief CEOs, chief operating officers, it might be the head of planning if it's a supply chain initiative. Yep. It's normally what we call C-suite executives. So you're interfacing directly with them, you're filling their questions, you're building a sense of confidence with that group, and making sure that they understand the ebbs and flows of the project, but also like what those challenges are, and you're escalating issues that need that level of support to be able to resolve those issues so that the project can maintain its path towards success and implementation.
Absolutely, and I would also add on top of that, the ambiguity is high, right? You go from kind of a defined, we need to achieve X by Y, to these kind of objective statements, right? Things become more, becomes a process to get to what do we need to do, and that is a phase all into itself, right? In these programs, right? And so it's fascinating. Also, it starts to really view continuous streams as opposed to an end date. So when we talk about methodologies a lot of times, right, and how that changes and the mindset changes with that, right? We're talking about dealing with project managers, and they're also dealing with, a lot more sometimes, especially today, it's like agile frameworks, right? We're talking about continuously executing day over day towards, something that's kind of prioritized and managed. And so you're focused a lot more on creating the framework that allows everybody to be accountable and to communicate better. So right. So the stakes are high. You're definitely you're seeing a lot more top of the mountain.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm gonna pause this. I want to spend some time talking about the build. So you mentioned ambiguity.
Yeah.
I don't want in project work when people talk about ambiguity. It's not only like what's the scope of this project work stream, what's the budget, right? Because we're doing a lot of estimates. But at the program level, to your point, like these are multi-year roadmaps. It's very ambiguous in the beginning. You're engaging stakeholders on like what are we trying to accomplish. So it's conceptual what we're trying to accomplish. But a lot of times as program managers, if there's no existing framework from a methodology standpoint and from an execution standpoint, you might spend a ton of time just on building that framework. To your point, you said this, but like I kind of want you to tease it out a little bit. Like, how do you build accountability, right? Because that's a big part of the delivery model, is building out those frameworks. And you also kind of touched on it as you were cruising through, but I really was, since the time of this, the concept of like there's a program, agile delivery teams, contractor resources that are associated with the program, that program budget, right? Like, so talk a little bit about like that, all those moving pieces of one.
So let's break that down. There's a lot there, right? So you're right. When you hit that next tier, when you're starting to manage multiple streams and multiple objectives, you're starting to wear different hats that feel a lot like director titles, manager titles, right? Because you're focused on a lot of the components that are necessary for this big stream of focus to continue. So breaking that down, one is this framework for how everybody is communicating basic level stuff. What I'm working on, why I'm working on it, what do I need. So, you have to start with kind of creating this framework that everybody feels safe and empowered into, and also creates this dynamic for delegation, right? Because we're program level, our budget's getting big, our team sizes get huge, and we're talking internal and external, a lot of times these enterprise level projects, right? Or suited programs, and so you are encountering a lot of different technology, right? Which has all kinds of different ways to interact, restrictions and dependencies, all these kinds of things. You're trying to normalize as much of that as you can, right? And what's really interesting is, at least in my experiences, the programs that I've had to interact with, you're hopping into different textual wells to summarize points of information, right? Because we're talking about that executive team does not want to hear that lowest level required of detail, right?
No, they do not.
They do not. And even for that matter, the next tier up, which is, when is these series of things going to be done, isn't probably high enough, right?
They're looking at like actual deliverables, and they kind of want to understand what's that milestone date. And honestly, to your point, the C-suite, that's what they're hyper-focused on.
Oh, absolutely. And remember, what going back to what I was telling you is that a lot of times the playbook to execute against that was handed to us is very light. So you have to build those bridges for everybody, the highest level, the kind of middle management and an initiative ownership level, and then down to an individual.
One of the big things I would like really pull out for our listeners is, okay, so you mentioned executives, you mentioned internal teams, you mentioned external like contracting teams, consultants that are doing some of this work. A lot of times there's vendors as well, like vendor partnerships. And if you think of it from a business standpoint, a lot of times the business vendors have technology vendors of their own that also are part of these initiatives. So to your point, the coordination, the communication, all that is essentially the job. It sounds so when you see it on paper, like on a resume, it sounds so basic, like, okay, you can communicate, right?
Yeah.
But when you paint the picture of what a program looks like, and all these moving pieces, and for people outside of technology, they don't really grasp the concept of how complex technology initiatives are, right? And they just can't grasp, like, why the technology people get paid what they do, like, what makes that job so hard, right? I always jokingly say, the concept the misconception outside of technology is it's just copy and paste, right? Ryan will argue about that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So anyway, I wanted to tease it out a little bit, just like what that means when you talk about communication at every different level. And to your point, tailoring communication to the executive level, to the director level, to the middle management level, to the individual contributor levels, to business analysts, to scrum masters, like, because they're all playing different roles, wearing different hats and all this, to business needs, to cross-functional, linear partners, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's huge coordinated efforts.
It really is.
Yeah.
And just I wanted to, everybody always needs something. Right? Everybody's raising their hand. I need something.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times the buck stops with the program manager, right? We don't like to know the answer, but we need to direct, right? We need to coordinate. And so how do some of that contextual knowledge and knowing the processes that play that are within that engagement with that individual contributor group or with the management level within that, it's a science to itself, right? It's an art form.
It absolutely is. I think about, there's this concept of a communication plan, right? And normally at the beginning of a project or a program, you kind of kick that off from all the different people involved in it. And to your point, it becomes an empowering piece, because what it does is it establishes, like, hey, these are meeting cadences, right? We're trying to not over inundate you, but we're also trying to have a framework in place so that we can quickly get to decisions and continue delivering work, right? And then also establishes exactly what you said there, the empowerment to make decisions, because in the beginning you kind of establish, like, okay, middle manager is going to be in this meeting.
Yeah.
Or tech lead is going to be in this meeting. They are empowered to make those calls, because we can't wait for 2 weeks for it to go all the way up the food chain, all the way back down. No, we need decisions being made rapidly, right? That kind of ties into the agile delivery model, right?
Yeah.
Like, even though we're not going to iterate indefinitely because it's a project, we do need to be able to quickly get resolution from somebody playing the product owner role, right? Like, so yeah, it's the complexity is there. I like to paint that picture in this forum of what these projects look like, because again, like, people outside technology, even people that are end users of it, don't understand the nuance that goes into testing, discovery, definition, resolution, the inevitable gotchas that come along the way that, because to your point, the charter's a couple pages, maybe three for a 3-year roadmap.
You've got some more robust ones than I've got before.
Yeah, exactly. Like a project charter literally can be 1 to 3 pages long for a 3-year program.
Yeah.
And so to your point, high level of ambiguity. And I'll be the first to admit this. So as a program manager, you come in, a lot of times project teams that are internal won't say this, but they already think like the project's gonna fail. They're like, we don't know enough.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
That's real.
It's real. So we have to instill a level of confidence in them in that high ambiguity phase in the beginning until things get defined of like, hey, I know the next step. And that's all really we own is. I understand the next step, and I'm going to drive you to the next step. All right, I know what the next 2 steps are. I'm going to drive you to the next 2 steps, 2 and 3. And I'm going to continue to communicate, like, we just need to get here to be able to do X, Y, and Z. If we need to define this to be prepared for steps 4, 5, 6, those are the moving pieces that, in our role, that's really where the consultation comes into place, right? It's funny because you and I were going to play a game with Tetris while doing this conversation and display it to our users, because I feel like the building blocks in Tetris and the planning that goes into like creating a structure where you can be successful is everything we're talking about. I love the analogy and the metaphor there. Unfortunately, our technology failed us. Our technology in the room is too current for an old game like a Tetris. But Tetris is tried and true in this way, and like the methodology makes sense for a metaphor for this, what we do every day.
Then it's funny, you talk about, hey, we're going to move you to that next step. And sometimes that next step is figuring out the next steps.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting dynamic the difference between program and project, where the skill level changes. Project, you know all your steps for the most part. There's ambiguity for sure, but it's got to be here. This got to be here by this date. And when you hit a program, it's objective based, and those steps are which objectives do we go after first? How do we align that objective? How do we unbox that objective, right? And then the ambiguity that surrounds that step or objective, as you called out, sometimes it is external and involved. So, bringing other applications. You think about, I think the time thinking about project management often is just, I've got developers, I've got testing, and I've got sign off, right?
Yep.
But you've got procurement, and legal, and marketing folks, and all these different stakeholders, right? And you've got operational folks, and all of these people come to play in the program, but not all at once,
Right.
and that's also striking the balance, right? You're talking about the next step. Who's involved in that step? What I think is interesting, though, is it, Chuck, it always kind of comes back to, and I get back to basic caveman tools for project management still apply programs. So you mentioned communication plan. That is a tool, right? That communication plan, oftentimes in programs, it becomes updated, it needs updated. So it's not a, I'm done with this, it's gone, but it's this tool drives what objective, right? And that is so key, I think, to scaling your abilities is, is learning the basics. Okay, why do I need a chart? It's behind why, and it also can drive some really good negotiation steps early on, set expectations.
Okay, you get on one of my favorite things in project and program management, which is
Bring it up.
negotiate.
Oh, yes.
Negotiate. So nobody thinks of our roles as negotiators. And again, I hate the fact that the roles of program managers, project managers, I feel like it's been, a kind of, I don't know, I hate to use the word bastardized, but that's the word that always comes to mind, is, it's been bastardized into the people that just create project plans and become taskmasters talking about tasks and dates. And that's all the deeper they get to, right? So you talk about negotiations. So deep dive into there a little bit.
Negotiations.
Yeah.
Yeah, negotiations are what comes back to three basic concepts. You only have so much budget to obtain the thing, right? And the budget is kind of either buying you time or buying you scope or buying you a resource to achieve that goal, right? So that is kind of the core, is really always at finance. But within that element, the negotiations occur always on schedule and scope, then beyond that, right? So how can we hit our date? Where are we negotiating? Where are we compromising? And that's often going to be in scope, right? Or potentially resource. But we're compromising on that element. So if we're going to hit a target, if a date doesn't move, then our scope is being reconsidered. If scope is everything, in which I'd love in those projects, but it's real world. If scope is everything, then you can negotiate against scope, against schedule, right? So you can say this particular series of objectives is going to go far beyond the original expectation. But you are the individual who is bringing the facts to bear at the table with the appropriate people, which let's talk about that too.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about negotiation. It's getting the right people to the table. And it's not it's not, here is a playbook. These people are your decision makers. It's not always the top of the pyramid, right? It's a blend, and it's situational based.
Yeah. Every client's different. Like, you would like it to be well defined, but sometimes it's like there's a third party. When I say third party, another stakeholder that nobody ever mentioned on the project. They're like, you know what? Because
Legal, compliance,
to your point, legal, compliance, procurement, some other internal party where they're, now with just some complexity, someone is telling you like, hey, we need to involve so-and-so. They weren't involved ever before, but now this impacts their work, right? Like, when we get to the concept of a RAID log. So, who's responsible, who's accountable, who's informed, who's a decision maker, right? Like, when you think about that, it could potentially be anyone in any organization, right? Who is typically your client as a consultant. So things can get wide real quick. You thought it was going to involve 2 departments, now it involves 8, right?
Yeah. For those keeping track at home, we've mentioned kind of 3 pieces of tooling so far: the communication plan, the project charter, and the RAID law. Right? Whether you run a project, whether you're running a program, or some other definition because your company gives it terminology or doesn't give it that particular title, these tools can scale, right? And so they're your fallback. So, as we continue to talk about scaling complexity, it's still going to be boiled down to these tools. I don't like to call them documents or templates or artifacts because it makes it sound static.
Yes.
And they can't do static.
No.
I mean, gosh, I would love a project charter that was static.
They never are.
No, they never are. So you have to have that mindset first. This is a tool. I have to explicitly know the input, what I'm doing with this tool, and why I have it. And if you can't, then no one else is.
Yeah, I love also bringing into the fold here certain things that we as individuals have created as like mantras for ourselves. So you mentioned something about caveman tools, like tease that, because I have like tons of my own, but I love hearing about other people's things they come up on their own. So
so I call them caveman tools because for me personally, I can drive most of them out of an Excel spreadsheet. Okay. And so I start there with a mindset because no tool is ever given. There are cloud-based tools that have subscriptions that organizations choose to either enable all the feature sets of or not. But as you scale in complexity, your need to cross-reference information is restricted oftentimes because that's the upper tiers of tooling, right? So what do you do when you don't have that? You have to have the base to do this yourself. And then you can consume data however you can get it. And you can use your caveman tools, using an Excel spreadsheet to drive that.
Yep. No, I think that's great. And so, I'll speak for myself in this caveman tools. So for me, like just getting some tips for PMs out there that may be listening. So for me, to your point, Excel can do so much. Excel can manage a project if I need it to. It's not the best tool, but it could, or if I really need it to. Project, yes. Program, probably not, right? Like, still eliminate there.
Yes.
I also, I try not to over-inundate the team with overhead from a tooling standpoint if it's unnecessary. So small work streams, meaning like maybe I got 2 of those on my plate for, that I'm managing simultaneously, smaller work streams. I might use a simple Trello board.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I just need to be able to assign tasks to people. They get an email. It's free. You mentioned this earlier. Like, it's free, so I don't have to ask, I don't have to spend money as a consultant. I also don't have to ask the client to spend money. Yeah. This tooling is free and everybody can use it at the basic levels, right? Like, obviously, they'll sell you more services.
And quite frankly, right?
Yeah, but quite frankly, you can manage it. If the organization or a client has Jira, that's a great tool. I feel like that covers program level down to project level.
Right.
It can be a simple Kanban board, so that ties to like a Trello board. Or it can be as complex as you want it to be. It could be a waterfall work stream. It could be an agile work stream, Scrum, you name it. Like at this point, Jira has evolved it, continue to, it's become the kind of go-to tool these days. I love a great Microsoft Microsoft project plan, especially in the program level. But again, one of my mantras is to not duplicate efforts, meaning it's the Scrum team are in Jira, and they're managing to the sprint level and the Jira level. I should be managing its milestone level because that's the next step above them. And so they understand what ties to each, whether it be an epic or whether it be some type of deliverable, whatever that is. Like they understand that these things tie to my project plan's milestone here, and then that milestone ties to whatever I'm reporting up to the C-suite. It's just but none of it's duplicated effort. That's my whole thing. In the beginning, I think back a decade ago, I remember PMs like chasing down. Back then, it was development managers. It wasn't always Scrum Masters, right?
Yeah.
Like, all right, which Jira tickets tie to this milestone? It was just duplicate effort, right? Like, then we got dashboards. They got easier in Jira. And so, at this point, I feel like you can manage at the next level up, and it just saves everybody kind of headaches of us as delivery leads chasing down the execution teams, right?
Yeah. But, it's great. So you mentioned Jira. What is Jira? This is a work breakdown structure, right? So you go back to caveman tools days. It could be Post-it notes on a whiteboard, right? And the reason why I want to say that is, yes, we have come a long way in technology that makes these things. And sometimes they're free and sometimes they're buried. But you always got to have the plan B, the fallback, right? Like, what happens if you're in an environment where the internet dies? You know, like,
How are we working?
right? How are we working? But on the flip side, let's go to the other side of that shop. You know, COVID, all our incomes in COVID. And one of the things that was really interesting about COVID, and I know we're deep into a tool set here, but tools are so important.
Yeah.
One of the really interesting things that I got out of COVID was this assessment of information management and collaboration, ease of use. So, for example, like you can get a Google Drive. It comes with a Word, Excel, PowerPoint, blah, blah, blah. And the Office has a very compatible kind of offering as well. And there's others out there as well. There are interesting ways in which people interact with live information. So if you have a document, I have to, as a human being, I have to find that document's location, then have to go into that document, and I have to find somewhere in that document the thing that matters to me or that I matter to you about, right? If I am something that's indexed, right, like I can type into a search bar and get to that location, the barrier to entry is much smaller. And it's why we use ticketing tools, right? The level of information and the assignment of activities and other components are 1-2 clicks away, right? So I bring this up to say, for purposes of scale of buy-in, a process will not work unless you have buy-in, right? And so always have empathy for those who are not in our space. A developer, for example, is not a project manager. That norm, no one to be, thank you. but I need accountability for mission on it, right? So if I need to be working with architecture or working with development, I am putting best to put myself in their shoes. If I have too many complicated tests, if I'm requiring too much level of estimation, if I'm requiring too level of detail before executing or something like that, they're not going to apply. No. I would love that level, right? And you know you would too. Like, tell me the estimate, tell me your daily update on the status, tell me whether you're concerned you're not going to hit, like all of that. And gosh, we would love that, right? But if you start layering in all of these metadata points to this work being accomplished, you don't have buy-in. You got to constantly think, what's the minimum amount of information that I need? The case-band tool, right? It's the minimum level of information that I need to keep everybody accountable.
Yeah, and the thing is, if that tooling is built correctly, the data will tell the story, right? You don't need to ask. The data will tell the story. And that's when we kind of take an add-on off and put on the new, what they call the audit hat, right? Because then you start asking the hard questions of, okay, development team's telling me we're going to hit this date, but the data says something else. So then you start saying, explain to me how. And sometimes it's a case of like, maybe we built the metric wrong, right? In the first place, like maybe something that we only gave 10% credit to is really 50% of work, right? And that's already done. Sometimes that does happen, right? But I need to be able to ask that question, because otherwise I'm questioning if we're really close or gonna hit this date, right? So those toolings become our audit function. And that is as a delivery lead, that is a role that we play as well, right? Like the transparency up top to C-suites, we can say that with confidence, and we can field their questions because we have data to support our analysis.
Yeah, and it's an interesting term you throw out there too, delivery lead as well, right? Delivery lead can be a program manager plus times, right? We can get into that too as well. But so yes, it's interesting, right? We talk about simplicity and complexity, right? I feel like that is in a nutshell what a program manager is trying to do: take complexity and simplify it, right? So that it can be handed off, so it can be understood. But like we say, it sounds easy on paper, right? But
on paper, it sounds super easy.
But it comes back to, what do you need and why do you need it?
I want to take our conversation in slightly different directions. We talked about the empathy, which typically goes from like our roles down to the project team, right? Let's talk about building trust, which is the upward mobility, right? Like, and the ability to influence stakeholder groups. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I feel like, again, it's communication on paper, right? And it's presenting information. But the reality is it's so much more complex than that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, let's spend a little bit of time
On trust, yeah. So trust, in my mind, can be broken down to a couple statements. Say what you're going to do and do it.
Mm.
If you want to, like, hey, we're in an elevator, here's my floor, say what you're going to do and do it. But let's unbox that, right? So we use a lot of terminology in project management, right? Because we're trying to convey risk, and the risk is elements of, likelihood and impact. Or if something's already happened, what is its impact and what is the mitigation, right? And these are just big fancy words to say, if it happens, what are we going to do, right? Or how do we avoid it from happening, right? So risk is an element to trust. It's expressing that you are thinking dynamically, thinking holistically. So that's a piece to trust. But another level of trust is building advisory level of communications. You're oftentimes working with steering of individuals who are not in every bit of the detail that because that's what you are hired for, or that's your responsibility, right? So conveying level of information, so an easy way to communicate and talk about, to have this kind of tabletop conversation like we are about something massively complex.
Exactly.
Is a trustworthy component.
Yeah, I would pause here and just kind of talk to the viewers for a second here. So to paint the picture again, we play roles in spaces where we are consultants to organizations. So what we're describing here is the process of coming into an organization, interfacing directly with the people at the top of every silo of that organization, and them saying things at meetings to us like, oh, why can't the team do X, Y, Z? And we're like, well, we're in the weeds with that team. I can tell you why. And actually what I would recommend is this other path forward. Right. Imagine having that conversation with the CEO of your company, the CEO of your company, the CMO of your company. You probably, as a listener, don't have those conversations at your own company. So imagine coming externally and having those conversations, and you've been there all of a month, 2 months, 3 months, it's a very interesting dynamic. It takes a hyper level of confidence, and the only way that you're going to have that confidence is this tooling, this framework, the thought process of building out methodologies. Essentially, you're creating an environment and structure so that we can do our jobs all day long and be that kind of go-between to drive accountability, but also be able to speak with just confidence on these highly complex, programs that are moving and changing every single day. And I don't think we've said it yet so far, but, programs normally are 50 plus people involved. Like sometimes as high as 100, right? Somewhere in the 50, I would say 50 to 100 is a program.
They can get bigger.
They can get bigger. But, like these large organizations, like you are literally the everything to everybody for 50 to 100 people. And, you often hear the term matrix environment. Matrix environment means you have a hodgepodge of full-time employees, contract associates, and they don't necessarily all report. There's not a direct reporting structure. We're just all here to to facilitate and complete a job. Mm-hmm. So to be a leader in a matrix environment is also a totally new dynamic that most people aren't aware of because, again, like I'm calling out risk and issues towards a common goal to the executive leadership, or you will, but those people don't necessarily report directly to us. They're accountable to the project team, and we're accountable to the stakeholder group from a transparency and execution standpoint, right? Yeah. It's a very interesting dynamic that goes on here.
Yeah, and so why are we having these executive level conversations, right? The exec's mindset is, I'm here to either consume a status or I'm to remove a blocker.
Yep.
Words are very, very powerful because they're very, very expensive. The more you incorporate these executive level time or a dedicated time. So there's a couple elements I think get lost in trust. So we talk about trust from their observation, some executive leadership observation of your ability to control and consume the information that's going on. We are also talking about trust of, I would say, of the the director level of or management level of individuals in that room, because you are representing their teams and their abilities or inabilities at times, right?
It's true.
And so there is a very, very important step when it comes to trust on that. And that is that you never want to present information that has not been first discussed individually, right? to come to these big organizations and to have specific call outs, specific situations against a particular work stream, and not being a member or support function for that is a disservice to them, one.
Agreed.
But it also will damage your trust and ability to function and have access to information.
To your point, no one's going to get the information anymore. Matter of fact, they're going to become standoffish, right?
Yep.
And it creates a very bad scenario of the program or the project team as a whole, because now you as that go-between, or me, myself, as a go-between, now one of those braces is broken.
Oh, yeah.
And that just can't be. Quite frankly, it leads to dysfunction, right? It's almost like having an alcoholic family member or a drug addict, right? Like, you just can't have that broken element of the family.
The facts are the facts, right? Like, it's still true. But as I say, there's art and there's science. And the art behind this is that we are a team. And when I say we, I'm not talking about just development, testing, stakeholders. I'm talking about directors, managers, VPs, whatever is in the sauce of the chemistry of that implementation, right? So, yeah, trust is so important. And it is, it takes dedication and it takes time. You, especially if you're the new individual coming in, say what you're going to do it for everybody, not just the executive team, right?
Yeah, no, that's another interesting dynamic. And it's even holding executives accountable towards, if we do raise a blocker to them, right? Like to your point earlier, we're bringing status to them that they will consume, or blockers that we need them to remove. In the few instances where we ran that blocker, that executive team cannot sit on that blocker for weeks and expect us to maintain a project plan, a timeline, right? Like, so it's even holding them accountable to, if this isn't removed by X date, then Y outcome happens, right? Like, they need to understand that. And that's, quite frankly, that's what they appreciate and need us to do, is to set the priority of, you can't sit on this. I know you have a million things on your plate, but like, this is actually important to this work stream.
Yeah.
So either you're comfortable with timeline shifting, or you're going to give us the answer.
Yeah. So we talk about a program. You have to establish steering. So you create that meeting. You create when that meeting occurs. You create how that meeting is conducted. You create accountability to everybody in that room. And that is one of your most expensive meetings in your entire program, right? Because it's needed involvement to it. So it is so hypercritical to invest in building that up the way you need it to be, right?
I'm glad you said that again, because you said earlier, I forgot to bring us back to it, how expensive meetings are. To your point, in IT, resources are expensive. When you have, I say this all the time, half-hour meeting in IT typically costs at least $1,000, if not more. And that's a small group within the rentals. When you get the larger meetings and you got executive level people there, it could be a $5,000 hour.
Way more, right? Or more.
So our ability to your point, facilitate an agenda, make sure that for things that we're getting, we have all the right information to come out of that meeting with the expected outcomes, to set the tone of what those outcomes or expectations are. So like, the amount of prep that goes into a meeting to make that valuable $5,000 or more hour, we pay for ourselves 10 times over just by corralling that. Again, on paper, conducts and facilitates meetings sounds so basic. But what we're really doing is there's lots of pre-work that goes into that, setting the tone of like what's expected and making sure the right players are going to be there with all their moving calendars. Make sure they're bought into, you're coming out with the decision in this meeting. We're not having 3 more meetings at the same cost and losing time, which also costs, it's those things. I think that people outside of IT don't really understand what this role and the value that it brings to the table. I think they only realize it when they see it in fluid and done exceptionally well. And a massive program delivers quiet and without a bunch of fallout, and delivers smoothly. And everybody goes on with their life to the next project. But for that work stream, it was easy. I think that's what they appreciate afterwards. They're like, I can remember the other 5 projects were like this.
That's real. And whether you're full-time or a contractor, and I think the stakes are even higher as a contractor. We just mentioned very powerful and important people from an organization, right? And to be considered a valuable contributor, to be considered a valuable peer. They're not looking at you like your title matters. They're looking at you as an owner of a very oftentimes important initiative.
Yep.
And not to take that lightly, right? Especially if you're external. You are an extension on that organization, right? You're an extension of that objective. There's often big stakes, big bets at play. And a lot of people are building their career, by the way, in the middle of your implementation of this, right?
Yep.
And we don't stop. So our frameworks of communication and all these things enable people to either do their job or to stumble over things like administration and escalation and those things like that. So there's a lot at stake that's not necessarily, as you said, written on paper that comes from this role.
Yeah. I think the last point I'll kind of make here, because I know we're kind of getting the time, and I say this to all my guests, I'll probably have to talk more about it, right? Because we can talk about this all day. Is this concept of, we're external parties, to your point, how do we add value in a way that people find it valuable, is a lot of times teams don't add the bandwidth on their team to do this work or in the skill set, right? So normally project work or program work is in addition to what already takes up 100% of their time, which is keeping the lights on work or day-to-day or ongoing work streams, right? This is something new. It's a huge lift for the team. It takes someone that's 100% focused to get them from point A to point B, right? And it takes a level of, I'll call it seniority, experience, demeanor to interface with, again, the executives of a corporation, and to be able to add value at that level where they say, yes, this critical work stream wouldn't have got done unless I brought in that level of resource. I think that often gets lost in the mix of, people just say, hey, it's project management, it's program management, and they're just like, it's just X. And here we are defining what X really looks like. On paper, sure, it's just X. In reality, it's so much more. Yeah. So I really want to drive home that point and make sure that people understand that there's definitely a value add to be had here. I think organizations that hire contractors like ourselves in delivery lead roles, program management roles, they understand that value, they understand that purpose and that need. That's why they budget for such a role. I don't know that the average, even small business, understands that when they go to do a ERP implementation or some type of systemic change, they probably need that level of expertise to come in and hold the vendors accountable, hold the teams accountable, help drive that forward and probably in a more streamlined fashion than they would otherwise.
Yeah, right. Because in absence of that, they have to take that on, whether they know it or not, or whether they're willing to sign up for that or not, right? And then also there comes into that a bias, right? And oftentimes you need to remove the bias out there so that you can have the negotiation on the deal, right? Yeah. Right. If I own this thing and I'm responsible for this thing to change, I am absorbing a lot of roles and responsibilities, and it's very hard to take an agnostic approach when compromises needed, when things go awry, right? And then one last thing you got to touch on too, when he said that a program is like 50 to 100 people. So if you imagine take an organization and you take 100 of their people and you put them in a room, all kinds of different titles, all kinds of different roles, objectives, and you're bringing in a new way in which they work or a new system in which it brings the change management, right, all of this dynamic change and operational role and operationalizing and the technology stack that comes with it, the development of it, the ownership, the technology that comes with all of this is kind of happening in parallel, right? Yes. And that's the saying the program manager is responsible for that level of change. But you do have a role to play that you are helping empowering everybody. So executives so that their whys are understood across everybody, right? So that the individual who is showing the talent and aptitude to engage in your program, who is removing those barriers, that they have recognition, right? That the teams have retrospectives on how they can perform and improve, right? That also goes into the program, right? Like that is all those skills that come into play.
Yeah, no, it's totally part of that. Really quick before you get out of here, let's, I'll give you an opportunity if there's anybody you want to shout out, or companies or products or anything else you want to promote. You mentioned where you worked before. I'll give you an opportunity to promote what you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are in the midst of building a new website or considering a composable e-commerce strategy, look us up, Aries Solutions. We are a commerce tools partner and implement into many other composable marketplaces out there. So come check us out.
Awesome. Website?
ariessolutions.io.
All right. And again, Chuck Scott, Scott Q Consulting. You can reach me at cscott@scottq.consulting. There is no .com on the end of that. I love saying that all the time. Thanks again, listeners. I hope you enjoyed this forum. This is the first time I've done a video format, so please feel free to subscribe to the newly created YouTube channel for the podcast. I will have this in the audio form as well. And be sure to comment, whether it be on LinkedIn, share. Let me know the feedback. This is a new form. This is episode 2. I thank my guest Dustin for being on. I will be happy to have you on again to talk more, because we could probably spend 8 hours on this subject alone.
Yeah.
But thanks again, listeners, and we will talk soon.
Thanks, everybody.